Hey, Coach Arns here, talking a little prologue at you. Okay, so this is the prologue right after World History Themes, right before Chapter 1, talking about historical aspects of democracies, how they affect us today, where we get some of our ideas of democracies. Okay, so first of all, we talked about some just basic terms. Democracy has to do with rule of the people, participation of the people, or rather by citizens, not the people, but by citizens. We talked about direct democracy, which is where voters vote on laws, vote to make laws, and indirect democracy, where voters vote for representatives that make the laws. And another word for an indirect democracy is a republic. Okay, talked about Hammurabi's code. Hammurabi was thousands of years ago, and he wrote a code, and so we still talk about Hammurabi's code because code, having your laws written down, is very important to democracy, so everyone knows what the rules are. We also mentioned the Ten Commandments from the Jewish faith. The Ten Commandments was a set of moral and ethical principles. The Judaism comes from the Israelites and the Hebrews from the Old Testament. We also talked about Christianity being started by Jesus a couple thousand years ago. Well, why do we talk about these two? The impact on our Judaism and Christianity, impact on democracies, the whole idea of individual thought, individual thinking, that people can think for themselves. The value of the individual is huge in those two religions. Okay. Next, we'll talk about Athens, Greece. You studied Athens, Greece last year with Miss Lockett. Athens, Greece, one of the things we always talk about with Athens is the concept of a direct democracy. The citizens actually voted on laws and could write laws in old Athens. And Pericles, we talked about, was furthering that democracy by paying jurors, people to be on juries, and that would include more people who were poor, the more poor citizens. And poor citizens could serve in the government because Pericles wanted to pay people in the government, and that was important. Rome was very important. We talk about some of the aspects that we get from Rome. We get the concept of a republic that is an indirect democracy. We talked about the Senate being a legislative body. Rome had two sets of coded laws. The very first one was the 12 Tables, and then 1,000 years later, Justinian, the Justinian Code was a code of written code that affected all of Western civilization. We also talked about Rome, citizens, the concept of citizenship, not being a subject, but being a citizen, and four aspects of law that we get from the Romans. Equal treatment under the law. You're innocent until proven guilty. We all know these things. The burden of proof rests on the accuser and not that accused. And the concept of unreasonable laws can be set aside. The Renaissance and Reformation, which we'll be talking about next week, were very important movements in Europe in the 1500s. And the thing about that is that we want to make is the importance of the individual, because the Renaissance and the Reformation both were periods and movements which had importance on the individual, and that's a big part of a democracy, because in democracy individual citizens participate. Okay, the Enlightenment movement is something that we mentioned. We'll also study it later on. The Enlightenment movement was about philosophers, and there were some very important philosophers about democracy in there. Hobbes and Locke were two of the big ones for government. Also Montesquieu. Hobbes talked about a social contract. The idea of a social contract was that people get together and form some kind of a government to protect themselves. And even though Hobbes believed in an absolute monarch, still the idea of social contract was important. John Locke came after Hobbes. Locke took it to another level. Locke believed in life, liberty, and property. That sounds very much like our Declaration of Independence. Yes, it does. Locke believed in life, liberty, and property, and that governments were formed by people to protect life, liberty, and property. Montesquieu, the philosophy of Montesquieu was separation of powers and the branches of government, and that's kind of what we get from Montesquieu. England was very big. Obviously, England was our mother country. A lot of stuff we get from England. And your book talks about all of the kind of democracy in England started with William the Conqueror, 1066, the last time England's been successfully invaded. William the Conqueror came over and sort of ended some of feudalism and some things like that. But just remember William the Conqueror. Also, Magna Carta 1215, just a little over 800 years ago, the Magna Carta, Magna Carta was a agreement between the barons, that is, the landed nobles, and the king. One of the things you got to kind of understand with all the stuff that happened in England, every time there was one of these documents, it always limited the power of the monarch, and that was part of adding to democracy. It was giving more people a chance. So you had Magna Carta 1215. Later you had the English Bill of Rights, which was just another movement that limited the power of the king. You had an English Revolution and then a Glorious Revolution, William and Mary and the Glorious Revolution. The things we keep in mind out of that, the Glorious Revolution led to constitutional monarchy, and that further limited the monarchy. From that point on, monarchies had to vote for, or had to get money from Parliament if they wanted to go to war. Some other things we get from the English tradition: a Bill of Rights limits power. I think I mentioned that. Habeas corpus, and that in the legal system, the government can't just arrest you and put you in jail. They have to charge you with a crime, and that's all part of habeas corpus. We get the concept of juries from England. Common law, which common law is law based on precedent, things that had happened before. And that's England. Real quick, not a lot of the French Revolution. We'll study that much later. One of the things the French Revolution taught us about democracies is democracies are very difficult. French Revolution started as a democratic, enlightened movement and turned into something completely crazy that was nearly like just a bunch of communists running around cutting people's heads off. All right, we'll talk more about that later. Some other things you need to know about the U.S. Constitution. Remember, keep in mind, everything we're talking about in the prologue was historical things affecting democracies, especially our democracy now. Obviously, our democracy now was set up by the U.S. Constitution. Constitution means to create a government, or make, okay? So the U.S. Constitution makes our government. So certain things that are come with the making of our government. We have a federal system. That means we have a national government in Washington, D.C., and we have local government in Montgomery. That is a state government. And then we also have local government in Limestone County. So the federal government is layers of government, and that's set up in the Constitution. We also have a system of checks and balances with 3 branches of government. You all know this from first grade all the way through: executive, legislative, and judicial. And we are a republic. Our Constitution constitutes a republic. And that's some of the things. Watch the video, study your notes, study the PowerPoint, and good luck on your test.